So this is a panel by OC Remix. Overclock Remix is a music community on the line dedicated to the promotion of video game music as an art form, and the way we do that is by reinterpreting and remixing music from video games. There's a lot of that going around at MAGFest, but we've been doing it for 20 years. So, yeah. I don't know. Dave is supposed to be here. Okay, so my name is Shariq Ansari. I'm better known as DarkeSword. I've been involved with OC Remix for about almost 17 years maybe now. It's been a long time. And with me I have...
My name is Nabeel Ansari. I'm Shariq's brother. I've been involved with Overclock Remix for about 10 years now, I think.
Yeah. So we are here to put on this panel. In the past, we've done this panel. What we do is we're going to have Nabeel, he's going to be writing a remix during the panel. So he's done some prep already, yeah. Right? And he is, what are you remixing?
So I'm remixing Chrono Trigger's Shallow theme.
Shallow's theme, easy. Everybody knows Shallow's theme, right? Right? Who here doesn't know Shallow's theme? Really? Let's play it.
All right, let me see if I can pull it up. I have it here.
Do you have internet?
I don't know. Let's see.
All right, so Shallow's theme is a song from Chrono Trigger that's been remixed like a million times, but Nabeel's going to put his own spin on it.
What's the direction for the board?
I think going this way. That way. Yeah.
Going up?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is off?
I think that's... Let's try it. Do you have network?
It's playing.
This?
Yeah, hang on. 1 second. Okay, hang on.
There it is.
No, that was someone else.
Sorry, that was my phone.
Oh. I was like, it's working.
I think it's because I don't.
Yeah, you don't have network.
What do I do?
I don't know. Do you need network? You don't need network to mix, right?
No, I don't need
I'll just play it on my phone.
Okay.
It's fine.
It's not a good quality.
It's fine. I'll just play it like through this way. There we go. All right, so Shallow's themes from Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a Super Nintendo RPG. Guys hear that? Very tinny coming out of my phone, but... All right, you guys get the idea. All right, so Shallow's theme from Chrono Trigger, very popular song, has been remixed a lot, but Nabeel's going to put his own spin on it. While he's doing that, we're going to have, the way this panel works is it's usually like a Q&A kind of thing. There's no prepared like lesson plan. This is not like a class. What we're going to do is you guys can ask questions of us, and we will try to answer them as best we can. This is really aimed at beginner, intermediate, but if there's some like expert level questions, we'll do our best. So usually I have DJ Pretzel with me also on this panel, but he's not feeling well today, so he couldn't make it. So right now it's just me and Nabeel. So we'll see how this goes, right? No pressure. So, Nabeel, you have something prepared. Do you want to show us what you started?
Yeah,
and then maybe we can like let you work
around 6 earlier today, I started creating this remix, and I was actually going to go through like bit by bit and show all the choices that I made, and then after I'm done going through this, then we'll open for Q&A. And
that's good.
I'll
yeah.
continue writing during the Q&A.
Sure. All right.
So let me just make sure all this works with the speakers. Let me just try something. So. This isn't. This is not working. This is working.
I mean, this should. Here's play.
Hang on 1 second. I think it is trying to play out the projector.
Oh, out of the HDMI.
Out of the HDMI, yeah. I think that's why it's doing that.
Do a test.
Hold on. Is it this one? Nothing? Do you want to open for Q&A?
Do a test.
What? This one?
No, right click and test. All right, so it's that device.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to open for Q&A?
Yeah, let's get started with some Q&A while Nabeel's figuring out his stuff. So does anyone have any questions? So who here is actually already a musician and you're looking into getting into making remixes and stuff? All right, cool. So we got a couple. All right, someone went like this, maybe. I don't know. So you're here to see if it's for you, right? Yeah, okay. So I guess we can start with some questions. Anyone? Feel free. We have a mic up here. Don't be shy. Just let's get rolling. All right, cool. Wait, is that mic on? No, the mic's not on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I'll repeat your question for you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so here's the most advanced question possible.
Okay.
EQ before compression or compression before EQ?
EQ before compression.
EQ before compression. That's what Nabeel says. Now, why?
Okay, so what happens when you're compressing a signal is you're reacting to loudness in the signal and then ducking it down. That's how a basic compressor works. So when you're EQing something and you're removing unwanted frequencies, what happens when you EQ after the compressor is already reacting to the sound as if it had the unwanted frequencies in it. So, anything that's like super resonant, for example, is going to trigger that compressor even if you had removed it after the fact. So it's going to mess with the dynamic range of your signal. If you EQ before, your compressor is acting on the cleaned up sound, so to speak. So you want to compress after you EQ.
That was very important.
That's great. I don't think it's working, so we'll just repeat your.
Maybe you're going to get to this, but
Sure.
I kind of got started using Ableton, but I don't know where to get instruments that I actually want to use for a remix. And I look around and everything is either extremely expensive or extremely dodgy.
Right.
Are there recommendations?
Okay, so the question is, they're not sure what kind of sounds to use, where to get good sounds when they're trying to make a remix. So a little history. I started writing MIDIs, and I used a program called Music Time Deluxe to write MIDI files, and then I used another program called WinGroove. I don't know if anyone remembers WinGroove. WinGroove was an old wavetable simulator. So basically, I ran MIDIs through WinGroove, and they sounded kind of real, but not really real. So after that, I got into FL Studio, and I started using sound fonts. Sound fonts are basically like an old sound, it's like an old sample format where you can have samples per note and then also per velocity. So you can actually get velocity layered, basically meaning depending on how loud or soft you play a sound, that changes the sample that gets played. There's a lot, we can hear it now, good. So there's a lot of sound fonts out there that are available, and they're free, or they're like kind of like out there and they're available to use. What I would say is, when you're starting out and you really don't want to spend a lot of money, you want to find some you can look for sound fonts, or you can find some key sample libraries that are like inexpensive but kind of good enough. And then learn those sounds that you have really well. Figure them out, like kind of inside out. Know how to use them. One thing is when you're writing, when you're like sequencing or you're using like electronic sounds, that electronic sound, if it's like a trumpet sound font, you're not writing for trumpet. You're writing for trumpet sound font. You have to write to your samples. So you can get pretty decent sound out of kind of like older samples, cheaper samples. A lot of my remixes on Overclock Remix are done with free sound fonts. I've since moved on to purchasing some nice sample libraries, spending a little money. Nabeel actually works for a sample library company. He can give you some good recommendations on when you're ready to spend a little bit more money. You know, you can start buying some. You don't have to break the bank, is what I'm saying, especially if you're just starting out. Nabil, what do you think?
So if you're starting out, the initial investment that you need to make is getting Native Instruments Complete. So that's it's a package. It's basically like, I think it's like thousands of instruments in it.
Yeah, it's well over it.
It's got like tons of pianos. It has several bass guitars. It has several drum kits. It has a lot of synthesizers. It has a lot of it has like a full orchestra of library. It has some choir stuff.
And there's some world instruments.
Some world instruments. There's some like jazz instruments. And it has a lot of effects as well. So when you get that, you can really, that's really all you need to make like professional sounding productions. Yeah. Anything else you get is just on a whim, or if you need a specific sound or something you are trying to do in music is like, it's just not working through the library that you're trying to use.
Right. So the thing about Native Instruments Complete is that usually around the summertime is a good time to buy it, because they do kind of like a summer sale, and you can kind of get it for half price almost, right, Nabeel? It's like
Black Friday.
Yeah, Black Friday. Yeah. So that's a good time to get it. And then when you buy Native Instruments Complete, usually you can, every year they do an update to it, so you can spend like maybe about $100 or so, and you can get like a whole bunch of new stuff. So it's sort of like a rolling upgrade throughout the years. And also a lot of sample libraries use Contact. Which is what Native Instruments Complete uses for most of its samples. So by using that, you're really learning the Contact software as well, and then you're able to sort of shop around and get other more like boutique sounds that also work in Contact Player. And when you go to use them, you have a familiarity with the software.
All right, so I looked up Native Instruments Complete.
Sure.
Like, yeah, it's like $600.
Yeah.
Before I drop $600,
right.
I want to know if I can do this.
Right.
So tell me more about the free sound fonts and where I start looking. That will not install Traveler on my computer.
Okay.
You actually made a website.
I have a small, very small website called soundfonts.darksword.com. So you can go there and you can actually download like a couple of like old sound fonts that I used to use. And if you've ever listened to my remixes on Overclock Remix, a lot of those sound fonts are there. I will also say, if you're not ready to spend money, you can go to Native Instruments and download Contact Player. Contact Player is free, and Native Instruments actually provides a couple of free Contact libraries that you can use in Contact Player in order to learn that software. You won't be able to like buy the big sample libraries and use them in Contact Player, but you can get a familiarity with the software without worrying about security issues with like weird software, you know. I mean, Native Instruments is pretty reliable. They're like industry leader in terms of music sample software. Also, you can get stuff from Impact Soundworks, which is the company that Nabeel works for. I don't think it's on. I'll repeat your question.
My question isn't really that technical.
Sure.
Okay, that's
fine.
Sorry?
That's fine.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, because I don't really know about this, but when you're thinking about making a remix,
Yeah.
and you have like you take the sound You want to make sure that you do the composer justice. Do you like make sure to use only like rhythms that you already feel go well with the song, or do you ever like listen to other composers and other like franchises that you feel like would help convey like a certain emotion that you'd like the song?
That's a good question
Yeah.
because I would say it depends if you want to do the original composer justice. Oftentimes, when people arrange, they will cover the song straight, and it will sound pretty much authentic to the original tune. Other times, you'll get arrangers who take the song and they sort of take the material but turn it into a completely new piece of music.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, when you look at the notes and the rhythms, it's all there. But the way it's built up and the way it's expressed with the performance and the tempo and the rhythms chosen, it sounds like a different piece of music.
Right. We were at a panel yesterday.
Yeah.
The
Banjo-Kazooie, Videri.
Videri string quartet. We were there yesterday, and Ben he started with this song from Banjo-Kazooie, which was pretty like peppy, kind of like a marchy kind of thing. Banjo-Tooie, cuckoo something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something like that.
And he did this kind of like Schubert, really like stretched out kind of slow, waltzy, romantic thing. And it's very different. And he actually really just started with that material and spun out into like this big, lush thing that wasn't Banjo-Tooie anymore. So there's a whole spectrum of what you can do. You can listen to something like a song from Final Fantasy VII, like Aerith's theme, right? And you listen to that in the game, and it's kind of slow, and then you can listen to like the orchestral version of that song that Uematsu did for Reunion Tracks, which is like sort of like that's like the classic one, like the orchestral version of Rare's theme. And it's not exactly the song from the game. There's a lot of different kinds of movement in it, the instrumentation's different, but it still feels the same. So it's not necessarily note for note, but it still has the same feeling because he's using the same tempo, he's using the same kind of like, the same movement. He doesn't really change the time signature that much. But I think it all depends on your intention, what you want to do. Sometimes you say, well, I wonder what will this song sound like as something in bossa nova, or what will this sound like as some big electronic epic.
Did you see the last night's concert, the Mariachi Entertainment System, by chance?
Mariachi Entertainment System.
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I saw the one before.
With David Wise. Okay,
So
yeah.
You should check that out on YouTube when they post it, or check out on YouTube. They have a bunch of covers. They're, I think, a good example of what your question was about, which is about retaining the original, feeling of the music while still, branching out. Because basically, what happens in their covers is it doesn't sound like they changed anything, but at the same time, it sounds so authentically mariachi because they subtly tweak like the phrasing of the melodies, they tweak the harmonies, they pass it off between different instruments like the violins and then the trumpets. So their covers are really good for that.
I think they're actually playing outside right now. So if you want to run out and listen to them and then come back.
Yeah. So like they'll do Gerudo's Valley, and it's like Gerudo's Valley, but it sounds so.
But it's
it's different.
It's different.
But the same at the same time.
But it's still Gerudo's Valley.
Because they retain the rhythms, they retain the structure of the song.
So
they just perform it differently.
Another thing is that when you write music, right? When you want to convey, let's say, sadness in a piece, how do you do that? What you do is you think about what you've heard before. What have I heard before in music that evokes sadness in my head? Like, when I listen to something, this sounds sad. What does that mean? So you think, okay, well, it means that this chord moves this way, or it slows down, or it speeds up, or all these different kinds of things. So all of the music that you've listened to since you were like a baby forms your musical vocabulary throughout the years. And what you write is what you've heard. Does that make sense? So, like, if I'm writing something sad, and Nabeel's writing something sad, right? We're brothers, right? But I'm like 12 years older than him. So I have a different musical frame of reference than he does, right? So if I write something sad, it might sound very different from what he's writing that's also sad. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he might actually write something because he listened to my music when he was growing up. Or, he might, because he listens to like a lot of like prog rock and stuff, and I don't listen to that stuff. I listen to like a lot of bossa nova and like Latin jazz and stuff. So we have different musical tastes, so our musical vocabulary is a little different, even though we're somewhat similar composers. So what you hear is what you write. And you bring that, so when you're trying to convey something in the context of a game remix, if you're saying, okay, well, I want to write something a little romantic. I want to take like the theme of love from Final Fantasy IV and write it a little more romantic. Nabeel might write something more classic oriented. I might write something like more like bossa nova, because that's what I'm really into. That's what I feel like when I want to write something that way. So, and it might feel the same. It might feel like, to me, it might feel closer to what Nobuo Uematsu is trying to convey with that song. So I would feel like I'm doing that song justice because I'm bringing to that what I feel he's telling me. Uematsu's telling me something with this piece of music, and I'm going to say, okay, well, let me contextualize that with my musical vocabulary and bring it back to him, and then I write something that sounds a certain way. And then another composer will do something completely different, because what they're being communicated feels different.
Have you seen, because I think he used to talk to me.
Yeah, Uematsu was here a couple of years ago, and yeah, I think he's watching his health. Yeah, but yeah, he was here a couple of years ago, and it was really fun. He performed with Earthbound Papas. Yeah, very cool.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
It's kind of like when you're doing like a remix and you want to listen to like something that you feel like would help resonate the kind of emotion you're trying to go for.
Yeah.
Would you think that you'd listen more to like the original composer, or would you feel like maybe depending on what you're going for, you might have to go to like a different composer altogether, a different like game or something?
Right. So the question is, do you feel like when you're remixing something, should you listen to more by the original composer, or should you come back to, or should you listen to something else to get more inspiration? Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I would say if you have an idea of the style that you want to put the remix in, you want to go out and you want to find the best artists in that style, and you want to listen to their music, because they, when you find those best artists, you can pick up a lot of the core of what they do, but also the embellishments of what they do, and then you can sort of assimilate that into your musical vocabulary. And then when you go to do the remix, since you've been listening to that stuff for so long, hours and hours for the past few days, it becomes part of that context for how you want to express the music, how you hear the music, and then you kind of just blurt it out, so to speak.
Yeah. The best thing a person can do as a composer is to listen to lots of music.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. All right, Nabeel,
Yeah.
now that you have sound working,
Yeah.
why don't we take a listen to what you have already, and then you can talk about it, and then we'll go back to get some more questions from the audience, and then we'll check in with you periodically. Okay?
Yeah.
right.
So what I decided to do was I decided to challenge myself by changing the time signature of Shallow's theme. Can you play Shallow's theme again, since
Yeah,
I heard it like
get it back
half an
up.
hour ago?
Yeah. Shallow's theme. Actually, should have like. All right.
So what I started with was I wanted to change the time signature. To do that, I need to change the rhythmic structure of that pattern that you hear over and over again. So I took the notes and I figured out the notes first. Sorry. So that's the notes. So then what I did was I created a rhythm in 7/8 that that sort of fits all the notes, but fits in the structure of a 7/8 time signature. Do you want to explain sort of what 7/8 is like?
So who knows what like time signatures are, right? Time signatures are basically like the rhythm of, most songs that you hear are in 4/4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, boop, 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 right? Yeah, it's 4/4 time. That's mostly what you hear. A lot of times you'll hear a waltz in 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. 7/8 is what you call an irregular time signature. What that means is essentially you've got 7/8 notes in the measure. So normally the way they do that is they subdivide into groups of 2 and 3/8 notes. So something in 7/8 will sound kind of like, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Or you could do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Right? So it's a little bit irregular because you're not like tapping your foot. It's not like a straight rhythm with quarter notes. You kind of have this like sort of delay and a little push with the set of 3. You'll see that a lot with compound rhythms. I did a lot of that when I was younger in like concert band. I had a band director who was obsessed with weird time signatures. So we did a lot of this kind of stuff.
So what I want to do actually is I'm going to play this, and I want you to create the structure for the rhythm, because this is just the piano notes.
Right.
So I'll play this, and then he'll structure it out for you, so you can hear the 7 beats. Slow it down for you also. Let me do that so you can get a better sense of that structure. Does everyone kind of follow the pulse of the music? Right.
Yeah.
So then I decided what I do a lot, and this is something I learned from sort of listening to a lot of progressive music, is when I have something that's very offset and syncopated in a weird meter, is I'll ground it with a drum part that is just quarter notes, even if it misaligns at some point, because it will always come back, because music is a lot of fractions.
Yeah.
So
essentially, if you have 2 measures of 7/8, you're going to end up with one of 7/4.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So then you get something like this when you add that quarter pattern in.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? Am I getting it right?
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So that, when you do that, when you add that sort of basic pulse on top of the faster, more syncopated pulse, it becomes a little easier to follow.
Yeah.
We like to say it's headbangable in prog metal, rather. So then I decided to harmonize it. So when I take stuff and I start to remix it, I will just usually ignore the chords entirely, and I'll just add my own. So what I did here was I added just some basic tonic chords with some jazz extensions. And then at this point, I needed to add a bass line to add structure to the harmony. So from there, it will. I think I'll just unmute stuff and so we can hear it. and then I can break it down after. So instead of going piece by piece, I'm going to let you hear the whole thing at this point because it's starting to get to a point where it needs to progress. So I'll play it from the beginning now.
Pretty good, Nabeel. Damn. Pretty good.
So
you started that at 6 o'clock.
What?
You started that at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, I did. So basically what I want to do is I just want to increase intensity as the song built up. So when the drum parts come in, I do something called the rolling snare where you have basically constant 16ths with the snare. They're very quiet. We call them ghost notes sometimes. So it's just kind of filling the rhythmic atmosphere, but it's not creating a lot of accents. And then in the second bar of this happening, I start adding accents. And so as this is increasing in sort of complexity, the other parts are following suit. So we have this basic piano pattern. And then in the next bar of that, what happens is it gets more rhythmically interesting. And the bass will also follow suit. It has this sort of descending figure and becomes very syncopated. So basically, as a narrative device, I'm using complexity of rhythm to make the song build, as opposed to using like volume,
yeah,
or adding more layers of instruments.
Right.
So this is another way you can sort of build intensity and energy in your music.
Yeah, you don't always have to use a reverse cymbal to build to a transition.
So then, when I come to a point where I feel like the intensity should level out,
Sure.
I break out into sort of a more structured, less sort of all over the place kind of feel. So the bass line actually reduces in complexity, because what happens is when you have sustaining bass lines, it's really effective in choruses, basically, of songs, because it provides a lot of harmonic foundation. So when you pair that with the piano part, and I'll show the piano part has something new in it as well. At this point, with just two instruments, you've already created a full atmosphere, the full spectrum, so to speak, of different registers that you're filling with information. So what I did here in this sort of chorus part is I moved away from these sort of block chords that are played all at the same time in a rhythm. to an arpeggio. So what that sounds like is, let me mute the shallows theme on top. So you can hear just the chords, so to speak. So the reason I do this is because when you arpeggiate chords instead of playing them as block chords, you can get a lot more motion and momentum. And so this is a way of, again, adding energy to the piece. And then what happens in the next bar, I move the shallows theme pattern upward an octave. And in the chords, the arpeggiated chord, I move the beginning notes down so that basically what I'm doing is I'm expanding the harmonic range of what's happening in the music. So you go from this, sort of clustered together, and now you're taking and pulling it apart. So now it's fuller on the low end and it's fuller on the high end. And that's just a very easy trick you can use in music all the time, is you can just take the same thing and just shift the octaves.
Yeah.
So once I established this energy, then I wanted to start playing with the melody. So I go back to the sort of what I was doing before with the rhythm and the rolling snare pattern. And then but now that snare pattern is on the rim shot rather than the snare. So if I swap them, you can hear the difference. So here it is on the snare. So that's it's very powerful. It's adding a lot of energy. If you move it to the rim shot, it opens up the space a little more.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do because I want to have the melody begin here. So I want to create some space.
You're not trying to have the snare really overpower the texture of the piece,
right?
Because you want your melody to come out. You want to be able to the melody's coming in, you want the listener to say, okay, I need to pay attention to that part.
Yeah. So this is specifically a way of dialing back intensity on your drums, is you can switch from snares to rim shots, or stick hits as sometimes they'll call them in different sample libraries. So I took this part from Shallows theme, which is like the main melody, and I started stretching it and moving it around a little bit. And at this point I wanted to tease the melody, so I don't play the whole thing. I just kind of reference the first opening notes of it. As the texture of the rest of the song is playing. And the way this works out is if you look at the piano and the melody, what happens when the melody is introduced, the piano is very sparse. And then as soon as the melody sort of, vanishes, it goes back to being complex. So when your melody sort of vanishes, you can fill in the space with the rest of your ensemble doing some things to respond to it.
A lot of arranging. So Nabeel just said the words filling in the space. A lot of arrangement is filling in the space. Generally speaking, if you have an arrangement where you just have long stretches of nothing happening, it's boring. It's just boring. So movement is always good. Unless you have a very specific reason to not have movement, it's always good to sort of fill in the space and have some sort of movement to keep the listener interested in what you're writing.
So following that, I move back to that sort of intense chorus section, and then I can recombine it with this melody now. And at this point, I also played the full melody. You know, I've changed it around a little bit rhythmically to fit in the meter, but I played the full melody so that in this sort of more energetic section, it's more satisfying, and you get that resolution after having it teased at you for so long. So that little flourish at the end there, I actually just put that in for the prep part where I was bringing the mix to the panel. After this section, right where this ends, I'm actually going to continue writing the mix during some more Q&A. And so I might get rid of this. I might have some other harmonic changes. I might change up the atmosphere a little bit, play with different melody maybe.
Okay, so we started at 9.
Yeah.
We have until 10:30. It's 9:45 right now, so we got 45 minutes to go. So Nabeel's going to get back to work, and then we are going to take
questions.
Yeah, actually, if we have any more Q&A, we have specific questions for Nabeel before he gets back to work. We can do that.
Anything you want to see about anything in the project?
Yeah, and like if you have questions about even like software, sounds, anything, you can just come right up, and then we can, yeah. Yeah.
How do you escape like a similar sound that you find? Like if I find a sound or like a chord, I think that it's like hard for me to get out of that. And, like, what can
Are you talking about in writing or performing?
Oh, right.
In writing, yeah. So
the question is...
So the question is, like, how do you escape sort of writing the same sound over and over again, right? And this is something a lot of people have trouble with. I have trouble with this still, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Even in this mix, this is a lot of the same stuff that I do all the time. And it's very difficult. But basically, the way you get out of it is you have to listen to different music that you don't usually listen to. And it's not enough to listen to it, but you gotta try like recreating it. And you need to internalize what this other music is doing. Like for example, I do a lot of these harmonically ambiguous chords where, you know, I change the chords, but it's basically the same atmosphere, and I'm not really changing the emotion that much for different chord changes. But, you know, if I listen to like some classical music, or I listen to some like very hectic jazz music or some big band stuff, there's chord changes that like as soon as they hit a different chord, the whole emotion completely changes. And what I need to do is I need to listen to more of that stuff and then try to practice putting that into my music. It takes practice, definitely.
Yeah. So one thing that Nabeel said was listen to a lot of music, and one thing that's really important, and we've talked about this at like previous year's panel, is you need to be able to listen to music critically. And like a really simple way of doing that is the example I always give is, let's say you're in your car, you're driving somewhere, and you've got some music on. It's like your favorite song, and you're singing along with it. But what you should do instead is, instead of singing along with the singer, listen to what the bass line is doing, and try to sing along with the bass line, right? What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to separate the parts of a piece and be able to deconstruct it in your mind. Like when you're listening to it, you want to say, okay, that's what the piano's doing. That's what the bass line's doing. That's what that weird synth is doing. There's background singers that are singing something completely different from the main singer. What are they singing? What are they doing? If you can separate and break down stuff that you listen to in a critical way, then you can kind of go back to your DAW or the piano with your book where you're writing the music, and you can deconstruct what you hear in your own head, right? So you have an idea for a song, and you hear what it sounds like in your head, and it's like, well, how do I do that? Okay, let me deconstruct it. And then also, like we talked about before with musical vocabulary, because you've listened to a lot of music, you have an understanding of the techniques that certain composers are using. You know, like, oh, I know that in in like electronica music, these bass lines are always doing this like weird octave jumping thing, or there's just like hitting every 16th note, and you know they're ducking on the downbeat and this kind of stuff. Or with like prog stuff, you know, you're listening to, okay, I know that there's a lot of movement in a bass line when there's not a lot of movement anywhere else. Lots of runs and things like that. So when you can break that down in your mind and then also apply the vocabulary that you have from listening to lots of music, it becomes easier. But then also, like Nabeel said, practice. So the more you do it, the easier it becomes too.
Yeah. I also wanted to say real quick, are you familiar with lead sheets? They're called lead sheets. So basically, a lead sheet is like, it's like sheet music, but instead of like a sheet part for every instrument in the song, it's actually just a melody, and it's written on top of the melody. It's just the names of the chords, and improvising musicians,
Jazz improv,
they use this to like, they read the lead sheet and then they just like sort of do their own thing and recreate the song. But lead sheets are actually a really good way to learn new chord progressions, because you can just reconstruct the song from the lead sheet with the melody and the chords and see how it works, and then erase the melody and then try to write your own melody over it, and then basically you've practice at least once putting that chord progression into your vocabulary.
Yeah, and there's a pretty famous video that got passed around YouTube a couple years ago by the Axis of Awesome. It's like this New Zealand comedy band.
Yeah.
It's called the I forget what it was called, but it's like about like the 4 chords that are used in every single song ever written. Yeah, the 4-chord song. Yeah, the 4-chord song. And what they do is there is this one chord progression that's used like everywhere in pop music, right? And what they do is they start playing those chords, and then they start singing like every song that uses that, and it's a really funny video. And then like halfway through they double the speed, and then they start singing like a dozen other songs, because it's literally just that again, but like the chords are faster. So when that video was being passed around, everyone was always like, all these YouTube commenters were all like, oh, pop music sucks. Pop music is just like, it's awful because like it's just the same song over and over again. But that's not true. And that's not what that video was illustrating. It's not a scathing indictment of pop music. What they're saying is that you have 4 chords played in this specific order, and there's so much you can do with that. Right? It's actually kind of beautiful to think about in terms of music, because it's just 4 chords, but then when you change the instrumentation, you change the lyrics, you change the tempo, the performance, the rhythm, the time signature, all of these different things. So a song is a lot more than just its chords. But when you just have your chords, it's a really great starting point for like just blowing out and writing something completely new. And then you go into this 4-chord progression and you just change 1 chord, and now your possibilities have become endless again. It's really amazing. So it's really good to like learn a chord progression and to not be afraid of using that chord progression. Don't be afraid to just be like, okay, well, Taylor Swift wrote this song with this chord progression. I'm just going to use that, chord progression that she used and just write my own song with it. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
In my experience, making up your own chord progressions is really hard and tedious and a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
There's so many chord progressions out there that you can just use.
Yeah.
And you won't, there's no legal recourse for that.
Yeah. Yet.
Because it's not really a problem. Like, that's how music works.
Yeah.
There's so many like pop chord progressions we use now that are dated back to like Mozart and stuff.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
I also wanted to plug myself real quick. I do a composition production stream every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
So if you want to ask more composer questions about writing, arranging instruments, I have a little bit of experience with setting up like live instruments and some orchestra stuff. I have a lot of production experience. I've been doing this for like 13, 14 years or something like that. And it's mostly a learning stream. Like, anyone can ask anything, and I'll take a break from what I'm doing and I'll just like talk about it and I'll demonstrate. So that's at twitch.tv/Nabeel Ansari, and I can spell that real quick on Notepad.
John, you had a question, or did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll add something.
Okay. Yeah, you can. I mean,
go ahead.
that mic doesn't work, but
John, why don't you sit up here with us?
What? Come on.
Just come.
So this is John Stacy. John Stacy is a horn player.
Be on this panel.
He's a horn player. He's also an OC ReMixer. John, yay, John.
So, actually, the question about how do you escape a sound, I actually have a direct answer to that because it was an answer that was given to me when I asked that question about 10 years ago. But basically, I was given an exercise to try where you take a really simple melody that has like 3 notes, so like Mary Had a Little Lamb. And then the easy version would be that you find a chord that you know that uses the first note of the melody. So like, let's say if it starts on an E, that could be an E chord, that could be an A chord, that could be a C chord, and then you just use that. And then you get to the next note and you do something else. So the next note's a D, that could be a B flat chord, that could be a D chord, that could be a G chord, something like that. And then you just do this over and over, and then eventually you get to where it's like, okay, I know a little more about chords now. Well, the first note's an E. I'm going to put a B flat because that's the sharp for a B flat. And then you just gradually build up to stuff like that. And eventually you get this really dense atonal stuff. And then you can also do it to where it's like, all right, this melody, I'm going to put chords under it. The notes in the melody are not going to be the root or the third of the chord. So if it's an E, it can't be an E chord, it can't be a C chord. It pretty much has to be anything else. So it's pretty much, they just said, just do stuff that you know is not what you would do, which is kind of weird. This is one of he was kind of really, really drunk and just throwing word vomit at me, but it's like, 10 years later, it makes sense. So
Definitely challenge yourself to do things you're not used to doing. That's how you learn. I just released a soundtrack to a game called Soul. It's a lot of orchestral stuff. There's a lot of like woodwinds and strings. And before I did Soul, I did not know how to write for the orchestra. When I got the gig, I didn't know how to write for the orchestra, so that was kind of scary because they were asking me to do something I didn't really understand. But over time, I learned and I listened to a lot, especially the composer Austin Winery, who did Journey and Abzu. And I learned a lot about the vocabulary of how he does things, and then I sort of just over time tried to recreate different movements from that, and that sort of defined the sound of soul over time. And then I was able to write a lot of different movements of orchestral music by just exposing myself and making myself really uncomfortable and doing something I felt I had no business doing at all.
It's important to also, if you have a kind of music that you don't like you in the hat right there. Yeah. What kind of music do you not like? Country. You should listen to some country because you will actually learn a lot about music from country music. And, if you don't like hip hop, if you don't like hip hop, I like hip hop, but if you don't like hip hop, but a lot of people don't like hip hop for some reason. But you can actually learn a lot about hip hop. Hip hop is kind of at like the forefront of like pop right now. Like a lot of stuff that happens in pop music starts in hip hop. If you don't like pop music, I mentioned Taylor Swift before, right? She's not a bad songwriter. It might sound formulaic, but Beethoven was formulaic. All these guys used formulas when they were writing. You can learn a lot from the kinds of music that you don't like. So if you're trying to break out and you're trying to become a better composer, think about the genre that you don't like and listen to some of that and see what you can learn from. Try to learn something from it. I'm not saying go out and buy a whole bunch of Garth Brooks CDs, but maybe like on Spotify, just be like, all right, let me see what's Garth Brooks song, see what it's doing, and you might learn something. You might hear something. You might hear something like rhythmically, or just some kind of like chord movement, or something he does in a melody that's just like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I might use that
It can be a very short snippet too.
Yeah,
it can
very
be,
short.
so to speak, a hidden gem.
Yeah, exactly. You might learn something from the kind of music that you don't listen to. So it's good to expand. All right. Nabeel, you want to get back to work?
Yeah.
Okay, so John and I will field some questions. Thank you, John, for sitting up here. Does anyone have any more questions or any kind of like discussion seed that you want to get into? We can talk about it.
Keyboard player.
Sure.
Whenever we try and enter drum tracks, they're either like
really stale or they take forever.
Right.
Do you guys have any tips on how to efficiently make good sounding drums?
Okay, so the question is, he's a keyboard player, and he's having trouble writing drum tracks, percussion tracks. They're coming out stiff, they're coming out kind of like, it's tedious to write, a little unimaginative, right? So how do you break out of that?
So I want to clarify something. Is this like a productivity question or like a right?
Or a creativity question?
I guess it could be either, but more like a tools.
Right. So productivity-wise, there's a very easy answer. Drum loops. Seriously, drum loops.
Yeah.
MIDI drum loops,
MIDI
and
drum-
also just samples.
Yeah.
Because someone did all the work for you already, right? And you know, there's the joke about goat farming.
Right.
So it's basically, you know.
Do you want me to tell it?
Yeah, tell the.
So the joke is basically it's escalating in ridiculousness how people gatekeep music making. So you start with drum loops, and you know it's sort of insulting.
It's like, hey, you can't use drum loops.
Yeah,
you should write your own drums.
So you write your own drums, but then you realize that you're using a drum sample library, so you have to go and record drums now.
Yeah, and you have to learn to play
then
them.
you realize that the drums you're recording were not manufactured by you, so then you go to manufacture your drums by buying some parts. But then you realize you didn't create the parts, so that you need to get the animal skins that were used to create, you know, the snare drum or whatever.
Yeah.
And at this point now you're farming for goats.
And you're not spending any time writing music.
Yeah.
So
We didn't get anywhere.
yeah. So drum loops. Use drum loops. If it's a
I-
productivity issue, use drum loops. Use MIDI drums. MIDI drum loops are basically like, it's just like small MIDI snippets, and then you can just apply it to a drum library.
So for the creativity side of that question, MIDI drum loops are actually really good for that. And this is something I do a lot. I bought this metal fusion pack, which is basically a lot of like progressive metal rhythms with like crazy syncopation, different time signatures. And I wasn't good at writing this kind of stuff, but I would drag those MIDIs in and I would look at them. And then I'd start playing with what was already there. I'd move the snare beats. I'd try to like retain the structure of what was happening just by listening to it, but by changing what was there. And by changing what was there and keeping the feel, I learned what was essential to the feeling of that pattern. And that goes for, you know, the actual rhythms themselves, but also like the velocities of the drums. You know, that ghost note snare pattern thing I was doing, that's something I learned by watching a lot of drummers and realizing that in the middle of doing all this crazy stuff with the cymbals and the toms, they'll have a hand on the snare and they're just kind of like going like this. Like really quietly, and then like at random accents they just kind of like slam it and then go back to a rolling rhythm. And just seeing that over and over again, I tried to start writing some of that. So MIDI drum loops, and also watching drummers, like watch videos of drummers where you can see like the overhead of every drum they're hitting, and like try to get a sense of like how much energy they're putting into their arms when they hit certain things, and that will help like the stiffness also.
And also, if you don't want to do any of that, you can really just, there's so many great royalty-free sample libraries out there of just drum loops. And you can just use those, and you can even use some manipulation tools. I use FL Studio for all my music, and there's a great plugin called Grossbeat, which allows you to re-trigger drum loops certain ways. So you can make a lot of really cool like breakbeat kind of things with Grossbeat. So you just take a drum loop that someone else made, you drop it in there, and then you just use some manipulation tools, and you get a really great sound. Yeah, just use drum loops. I mean, that's the easy answer. Yeah.
Especially for some context, when you're in a band and you're not the drummer, you don't have to write the drum parts.
Yeah, the drummer usually knows what
There's
they're
no
doing.
responsibility to write your own drum parts.
Yeah.
And
if anyone ever tells you, if anyone ever gives you shit for using a drum loop, you could just say, I just didn't feel like writing the drums. Why should I? Why should I? Someone else did it for me. It's great. Okay. Any more questions? Any more discussion seeds?
Process, production, arrangement.
Process. We got half an hour, guys. Let's go.
Yes, well, actually, if we don't have any other questions there, can I add a little, expand on that last one?
Sure.
So the way I started doing drums, because I didn't have access to drummers for a while. So what I did, you can go on several websites that have beginner drum tutorials. And, you mentioned you're a keyboard player, so this is kind of a thing that I did. But the drum tutorials, it'd be like, here's how you play a samba beat, a very basic samba beat, and let's start it slower. And so it would be the kick. They would start with, all right, just the kick, boom, 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 boom. Well, I'd tap that out in the metronome and figure out what tempo it was, and then I would just go on the key, follow along in the drum, just bum, 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 right? And I would just, okay, that's good. And then, all right, what are they doing? What are they doing with the, they do some things with all the other things, and then I'd do one part at a time, loop the video. What are they doing with the hat? Okay. These are all on separate tracks, okay? And then eventually it'd be like, okay, what are they doing with the snare? What are they doing with all the toms? What are they doing? Oh, they have some congas in there. Let's do those too. And then eventually it'd be like, okay, so they played it at half tempo. Well, this is MIDI. If you speed it up to double tempo, well, now you have a samba. And because I was just playing back what they did note by note, and so anytime I do drums, either have somebody do drums for me, or either record it or use a loop, or it's just literally just, okay, I'm going to slow this down to 40 beats a minute, set it to where it clicks 16th notes, and I'm just going to play in kick, just kick, just kick, just kick. Okay, snare, just snare, just snare. And it's slow, but you only have to do it once. So that's what I started doing.
Okay, Nabeel, are you going to work a little bit more on this? Okay, why don't we talk a little bit more? Does anyone have any questions? Questions about OC Remix? Okay, question.
When I'm doing electronic music, how do I know where to set levels, especially in terms of volume and when I'm done with the project? Like, how do I know where to set those levels for presenting? Like, how loud should it be?
How loud should it be? There's a technical answer to this. How loud should a electronic track be?
So are you asking like for mastering purposes, like releasing public? So are you intending to master yourself or to take it to an expensive mastering engineer?
Myself.
Okay, then you want to just master using a limiter at 0 decibels. That's really all you need to do because you're not really trying to format it for specific like vinyl or whatever. For that stuff, you really want to take it to a proper engineer. And in that case, you wouldn't master with any compressors or stuff on your master bus. You want to have basically roughly the peak of your song at like -3 decibels. So they have some headroom. And you'll also render it at a higher bit depth, like 24, even 32 bit. And then what they can do from there is they'll apply, their expensive equipment and stuff, and it won't degrade because it's a high bit depth. And then they will put it up to, the loudness that it needs to be, that they know from experience works on a specific format, like streaming or vinyl or whatever it is they're going to do. So if you're self-mastering, just blast it. Don't over-compress it. Just takes practice. If you're taking it somewhere else, you're giving it to someone, even if it's not like a professional service, just don't compress it at all, and just have the peak like be around like -3, and that's what you need to do.
Yeah. Within your track, if you're talking about like levels for specific instruments, this is kind of I don't know if this is going to answer or really address your question, but it's kind of leading me towards something that we talk about a lot. Nabeel and I talk about this a lot, where a lot of times when you have a track, we get a lot of submissions at OC Remix from people of all skill levels. So a lot of times when we get these submissions, there's a certain crowdedness and a busyness in the submission, in the piece. And what we find is that people try to use EQ, and they try to use a lot of technical solutions to fix crowdedness issues in their pieces. But what it really boils down to is part writing. A lot of problems in an arrangement can be solved with better part writing. And what that means is, say you have two lines, a melody and maybe a counter melody, or like something that's doing like comping chords in like a piano or like a repeating synth or something, and they're just overlapping and they're just sitting on top of each other, right? And they go in and then they try to carve out all of the frequencies using like really aggressive parametric EQ and all this stuff. They're just really trying to like, you know, carve it all out so like the melody and then it sounds weird. It sounds hollow. When really all they could have done is they could take the melody, bump it up an octave, take the comping chords, bump down an octave, right? Or maybe just lower the volume on one of them. And now you don't have this messiness. It sort of separates a little bit. Part writing is really important. Composition, even if you're writing like a techno banger, composition is very important. There's certain principles that sort of work throughout writing process, right? You can kind of think of it. You can think of a piece of music. I mean, we're all gamers here, right? And we all have heard chiptunes before, you know, stuff from NES. NES has a triangle wave, two square waves, you know, the white noise channel, and then like a PCM channel, right? That's like the basic NES like sound, right? You listen to old Mega Man soundtracks, that's all it is. Those Mega Man songs, they sound like so full and so like well written and like everything works because there's part writing there. You have your white noise channel and PCM channel kind of like laying down this percussion beat, and then you have your triangle wave doing like the bass line, and then you have one of the square waves doing the melody, the other square wave doing like arpeggios or chords or, you know, a counter melody. And because of the way everything's sort of constructed, and you have something doing something, and then when it stops, something else fills in the space. Well, you talked about filling in the space. It sounds full, it doesn't sound crowded, it doesn't sound like everything is on top of each other. It sounds like everything's working together. So you can kind of think of like anything that you're writing, you can sort of like think of it in terms of like an NES piece, right? So if you're writing like something for like brass quintet, right? You got your tuba and your euphonium, right? Those are like your triangle waves, kind of like at the bottom. Right. You know, you've got your French horn and your trumpet. Those are kind of like your two square waves. And then, I don't know about the white noise in a brass quintet, but essentially, you know, you have maybe like a rhythm. You have like like a trombone is maybe doing like something more rhythmic. Or, you know, a jazz combo, bass player, drummer, piano player, sax player, you know? Those are your two square waves, your triangle wave, and your white noise channel. Techno piece. I'm not saying every piece of music has to have 4 parts or 5 parts, but all of your voices in your piece are kind of like filling one of those roles. You have melody, counter melody, chords, bass, percussion. They all sort of fit together. So when you break down a piece of music, and you can kind of see it with what Nabeel is doing here. He's got like his piano that's playing, you know, that shala like arpeggio pattern. That's like one of the square waves in an NES track. He's got his drums. He's got his bass line. He's got like his chords that are playing in the piano. He's got his melody. You know, he might use more voices as he progresses, but he's still assigning each part a role to play in the piece, right? So what you're getting is part writing. Part writing is so important, and if you think about the role that each voice plays in your piece, then you're going to get something that's not fighting itself. Does that make sense? Okay. John, you have anything to, because I know you arrange a lot for like chamber?
Yeah, I do almost exclusively like
live instruments.
Yeah, live instruments now. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a thing that a lot of the stuff I do, especially when I get hired to like play for soundtrack stuff, is that I have to record it all myself, and sometimes they give me a basic thing that says, hey, here's a basic melody idea, arrange this, and then record it. And then a lot of that boils down to what I want to play this. Because sometimes people they do a thing, and then what happens is that you have one part just in the mid-range just going da, da, da. You ever hear somebody try to write epic final battle music, and they just have a choir going da, da, over and over? You have to really imagine like 50 people standing in the back of a room just going da, 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 and it just like, if you think of it that way, you realize how ridiculous it is. And then whenever you write, thank you, whenever you start producing music, look at all the parts of your piece and then wonder, does this actually do anything? Because if you're just saying, okay, I need a melody, I need a pad, I need a bass drum, I need a bass part, and I need some drums, and then you have your pad just high velocity, just chords, sustaining, not going anywhere, does that actually do anything? Okay, well, mute that. Does your melody and your bass sound good? Okay, good. Add the drums in. Does that sound good? Okay, now add the pad in. Did suddenly everything fall apart? Well, then rewrite your pad. And then whenever you're writing for live instruments, you know, it's like, okay, I know I want to have 16 instruments. Okay, 8 of these are just holding whole notes. And they're all the same whole note. Okay, why do I need these 8 instruments? You know, it's just kind of a thing that if you just think about, does this actually add anything? And would this be interesting on its own? Would this be worth anything? By the way, sorry for inflicting my...
That was good, John.
It'll be on an album. It's called Daw.
Okay. Any more questions? I know we're all like intently watching what Nabeel's doing. Any questions about like software and stuff? Software, hardware, in the back.
So, like when you're at full beatbox,
yeah.
We were wondering how to really record it. Like what kind of mic to use and what kind of software to use, and like any tips on actually recording it.
Recording beatboxing.
So there's a lot of pop.
There is a lot of pop. I mean, there's pop filters that you can get for your microphone, obviously. I mean, this is a lot of mic technique. I think it really boils down to.
Sure, SM57 mic, a dynamic microphone, is best for recording drums and beatboxing and stuff.
What is it? A Shure?
Let me put that on the.
Yeah.
It's like the basic. It's the basic, but everybody has it.
They use this for guitars and stuff also, like guitar, because it can take pretty much anything, like any energy you put into it.
And then,
I know a lot of beatboxers who use kick drum mics.
Kick drum mics. Kick drum mics are used for beatboxers as well. Thanks, Will. Okay.
and then there's also some technique you can do, like with if you want to be all fancy, you can actually go, there's tons of tutorials on this, but I notice a lot of people when they do it live and they do the beatboxing thing, they actually basically completely cover the mic with their hand. And then it'll just kind of have a little hole between the fingers. And then I can't really do it because I've only seen it done, but it's kind of just the concept of you just wrap hand around the mic, and that works as kind of a pseudo pop filter. And I've seen that a lot for live gigs, because if you're beatboxing live, you kind of can't have this pop filter going and just kind of, okay, I'm going to beatbox with the mic this far away from me, you know. So it's just like, okay, they kind of just improvise with their hand.
Yeah. I have also seen, I can't tell you the exact like hardware, but I have also seen, when seeing a cappella groups perform live, I have seen the beatboxer have a throat mic, which is basically a microphone that is attached here, stuck to their throat, so that they're not actually into the mic. They're actually, all of the sound is coming from their throat. That's something worth researching. I don't know too much about it, but I know that is something that is done. Great. Sure. Any questions? Any more questions? Nobody. Specifically about this. Okay.
How does the MIDI interface compare compared to like FL Studio.
Okay, so Nabeel, Sixto has a question.
Oh.
Sixto has a question about Studio One. How does the MIDI editor in Studio One compared to FL Studio?
It's a tiny bit clunkier because you don't, the main thing everyone loves about FL Studio is when you left click, you get notes. When you right click, they will delete them, like in MS Paint, for example. When you do that in pretty much any other program, instead of right click being erased, you get a right click menu.
Yeah.
Which is a little debilitating when you're used to that fast sort of painting workflow. So yeah, so I use, you can map these anywhere you want. I recommend you get like a little keyboard attachment, like you have some kind of thing like that.
Yeah, I actually have a Razer Tartarus, which is designed for gaming. It's like a left-hand extra keyboard, and it's designed for gaming, so you can like do cool stuff. But it actually maps to keyboard. So Nabeel and I and a friend of ours, we swear by. This is a Logitech G600 mouse.
There's 12, for people who can't see, there's 12 buttons.
There's 12 buttons on the side of this mouse, and you can actually use the Logitech software to map any key combination to any of those 12 buttons. And if you also press this button right here, it's like a shift button that basically changes all these.
Like
so essentially you can have 24 different functions on your thumb. And if you use a DAW, there's a lot of functions that are mapped to like key presses, keywords.
So to go back to the question specifically, for the hotkeys, yeah, I have like 3 and 4 are like my pencil and my erase. And it's just, at this point, since I've been using it for so long, it's just ingrained to me to do it this fast, right?
Yeah. Thumb buttons. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, and then at least a program like Studio One, you can go in and you can remap every single. There's so many functions specifically in this program. You can see they have no mapping. So for all the keyboard shortcuts they have, there's like hundreds more things you can do that are not even mapped to any keys. If you had macro keys, you could assign them and pick whatever. I mean, you can see how many.
There's so many
things you can do. And it's stuff like, I mean, it's crazy stuff that could be useful to your composing workflow, like select every downbeat. If you like drum programming, maybe that's useful to you. Put that on a thumb button or something, right? Yeah. I would say, so it fails in that aspect for the pencil erase thing, but in other things it's very powerful. Like for example, I don't know the state of FL currently, but Studio One has a humanized function where you can randomize velocity and note.
FL Studio has that, yeah. There's a lot of improvements to FL Studio since you stopped using it.
Right.
They're trying.
Yeah.
God bless them.
And then you got stuff like, I think FL has this too, like apply scale. You got quantize, but also you have like partial quantize, so you can select the strength of the quantize. Mm-hmm. If you want to. If you played something in, you want to retain a natural feel, but you still want to kind of glue it to the grid a little more, you do quantize 50%. You can go into this menu and you can actually do a full spectrum of percentage for it. And you can also do it independently for start and end. There's a lot of things you can do. So in terms of pencil and erase, it was a pain, but there's a lot more things that I really like about this MIDI editor that FL sort of has some catching up to do on.
I use FL just for me. It's so easy.
Yeah.
Also, this is my favorite thing about this MIDI editor is you can just add another lane and you can use it for modulation. You can add another lane and use it for pitch bend. You can stack lanes at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
And the one last thing I really like that FL has trouble with is you can highlight a bunch of tracks, for example, and you can see them all at once. In FL, you have to put them all in the same pattern in order to be able to do this.
Yeah.
In this and other programs, you can keep them on separate tracks and just highlight them. You can selectively view them, and you can also selectively edit them. So I'm viewing all these right now. None of them are editable. I can view all of them and edit the drums. I can also view all of them, edit the bass and the piano at the same time. So it's very flexible in that regard, and that I think this is the feature that made me switch to Studio One, definitely.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'll use
FL for MIDI, yeah.
I'm trying to consolidate to one thing.
Yeah, you want one DAW, yeah.
I haven't tried Studio One.
Yeah. So one thing I want to point out is Nabeel is he's kind of writing everything with his mouse. That's also like a way that I've done things in the past. But most DAWs, pretty much every DAW that's worth using supports MIDI controllers. So if you're a keyboard player, you can just play into your DAW and record the MIDI data that way. We talked about quantizing, where you can snap things to the grid. That's really useful. There are other kinds of MIDI controllers out there. So if you don't know how to play keyboard, they have what's called breath controllers, where you can actually play into a breath controller and then use fingerings in order to record MIDI data. So they have those. There's a lot of different kind of like non-piano type MIDI controllers that are kind of becoming more and more common, and more people are experimenting with getting away from the piano centricism of MIDI controllers. But you can just write stuff with a mouse if you want. That's also good. Nabeel, we have about 7 minutes left.
Give me a few minutes.
You want like, I can give you 2 minutes, maybe?
That's fine.
Okay. Any questions? No questions? John, any questions? Anything come to mind?
Well, maybe. I don't know. I kind of just drew up a blank now. Suddenly I have no questions about anything ever.
No questions about anything. Yeah. Sure.
You guys are doing arrangement. How do you incorporate live instruments, especially when you're recording with other people from across the world?
Okay. John, have you ever done this before?
Yes.
So the question is, when you're working on an arrangement, how do you incorporate live recordings from other musicians from like far away?
So it's a lot of management from the beginning, and that whenever you're arranging it, if you know who's going to be recording it, it helps if you write their name on the track. So for example, if I'm writing a thing and I'm using, let's say I'm just using a thing that's 2 trumpets and a guitar, I'll actually write on it John Robert, trumpet 1, Robbie DeGay, trumpet 2, Juan Medrano, guitar. I'll actually use that because I like it further. But anyways, and then I'll write it with them in mind. I'll think it's like, okay, Robbie can't go extremely high, so I'm not going to write high stuff for him. And I used to keep that in mind. And then whenever it comes to actually recording it, I'll send everybody the exact same click track. And it'll be a thing where I'll also export a MIDI version of that click track. They'll import that MIDI into the DAW and then put the click over it, and then I'll export it from me from point 0. That's basically back up 1 measure before the start of the chart, and then do that. And then whenever you import it, everybody should line up perfectly on top of each other. Because there's some people that I've seen that they're basically just, yeah, it's 120 beats a minute. Just put 120 beats in your minute in your DAW, and then you'll have some people that there'll be a 6 measure lead in, and you'll have some people that they clip the first note because they started right on 0. So it's just a matter of saying, keep in mind who you're writing for, send them MIDI click track and an audible click track, and then a backing track if you want, and then basically say, send me these specifications. On my more, I like to call my, basically, I don't even have a word for it. It's basically whenever I'm being completely anal that I want it a certain way. It's like, you'll send me 48K wave, it will be 24-bit, it'll be exactly starting this long, it'll be exactly mono. If you play a mono, it'll be stereo. So it's kind of just tell them exactly what you need.
Management is very important. Yeah. Okay, Nabeel.
Yeah.
We have 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you want to?
So I'm adding another section to the piece, and I obviously don't have enough time to finish it. But I'll show you what I'm working on and sort of my thought process behind what I wanted to do.
Sure.
So first, I will play it from the top. Who just came in, this is a 7/8 rendition of Shariq. for those who can't hear it exactly what's happening here, I took quarters of time, the arpeggio, it's a different track in Chrono Trigger, and I sort of combined it into a 5/4 section.
Yeah.
And what I did was I extended it to match the meter of 5/4. So soloed by itself. And I have it playing in octaves rising to sort of create a momentum. And then I have the bass guitar double the same thing. This is something I see a lot in Japanese jazz, is the piano will just arpeggio, and the bass will just double it. And then while that's happening, while it's basically just creating this texture of this same arpeggio happening over and over again, the drums start to have some rhythmic interest. And then I was introducing the melody at this Shala's theme, sort of combine source tunes that are not normally together. And this would later turn into like a more solo section, segue back. So if I spent some time at home making this, I would flesh it out some more, and then basically this is like a very original sort of distant take of Shala's.
Yeah, and then you would submit it to OC Remix.
Yeah.
And we would judge it and say, no, it's too different. Okay, so we actually have to wrap it up, guys, because it's like 10:30. Thank you so much for coming to our panel. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for putting up with our silence when we didn't have any questions.
Yeah.
You can find us on ocremix.org. Check out Nabeel's stream on every Tuesday night at 7. Twitch.tv, Nabeel Ansari, and yeah, happy MAGFest. See you guys next year, I guess. We have merch in the back too, so sorry, Jarrell. So if you want to buy some t-shirts, buy some t-shirts. All right, thanks guys.